In the world, there's a diversity of atomic configurations, atomic arrangements, in which unstable configurations are eliminated and deselected, and stable configurations are created and selected for. This manifests itself as the aggregation of stable configurations over time and the elimination of unstable configurations over time. An example of this is a windy courtyard in which leaves can move around, and they move around by the wind in the courtyard, in which they settle over time into stable configurations of nooks and crannies. Another example of this phenomenon is how species are naturally selected for and achieve a stable configuration over time via the accumulation of adaptations, which is stable and selected for. This general principle of what I call structured selection supersedes natural selection of the survival of the fittest, and instead to be the survival of the stable. Stable accumulations of leaves occur in a courtyard, a windy courtyard, and stable configurations of matter in adaptations accumulate over time in species via natural selection. Natural selection is a special case of structure selection, which is a more general principle. Thermodynamics can be brought into this conversation, in which the configurations of matter which are stable can be like a chemically stable species, in which, not to be confused with a biological species, in which stable chemicals accumulate and aggregate over time into stable configurations. Many types of things can evolve and develop like natural selection, but in an entirely different process. Things can adapt to conditions just like how species adapt to conditions. A useful perspective to take is of an environment which surrounds a structure, which is structure that is within an environment. The structure has substructures, which is structures within the structure, and environmental conditions can select these substructures, such as in how environmental conditions of a habitat can influence the genes of a species. Variance in environmental conditions can cause an instability in the environment, in which that will cause substructures to not be able to adapt to the changing environmental conditions, such as like how genes won't be able to aggregate over time in accordance to the environmental conditions of a habitat. Atomic configurations / substructures can be dependent on environmental conditions, such as how genes and adaptations are dependent on environmental conditions of a habitat. The environment and the structure evolve together, and they interact via the environment selecting structure in its substructures, whilst the structure selects the environment to be stable. This evolution of the environment and the structure together is what I call co-selection, in which this environment is selected and also the structure is selected to be stable. Many examples of co-selection can be seen throughout the world. Starting with genetic systems. In genetic systems, genes are selected by environmental conditions, and also which constitutes the selection of the structure, whilst genes select the environment in gene expression, where genes produce proteins that manipulate and select the molecular environment, in which that is selection of the environment. In cellular systems, the environmental conditions select specific biochemical cascades in signal transduction, which are triggered by sensing receptors, which constitutes the selecting of the structure by the environment. Upon the completion of biochemical cascades, a selection of a cellular response occurs, in which the environment is selected to be stable to cascades. For nervous systems, environmental conditions of stimuli affect what is thought about in the brain, and ideas are selected, in which stimuli acts as evidence for ideas, which constitutes the selection of a structure, in which after ideas are selected, the environment is selected via muscles moved by ideas, selecting the environment to be stable to ideas. As muscles move around, they manipulate the environment and they select specific configurations, which constitutes the selection of the environment by the structure. In computer systems, programs are selected by environmental conditions, in which the programs are selected by if-else statements in the computer programs, which constitutes the selection of the structure by the environment. When programs have finished their selection by input devices, output devices select the environment in which the environment is selected to be stable to programs. This constitutes the selection of the environment by the structure, in which programs manipulate the world. For AI systems, artificial intelligence systems, environmental conditions are inputted into the AI, in which AI ideas, as I call them, are selected, in which this constitutes the selection of the structure by the environment. When the AI ideas have been selected by the environment, AI outputs select the environment to be stable to AI ideas, in which this constitutes the selection of the environment by the structure. With the example of genetic, cellular, nervous, computer, and AI systems, there can be a differentiation between automata and entities, in which automata are agencies which don't create substructures, whilst entities are agencies which create substructures, such as via thinking. Starting with entities, in genetic systems, there's the creation of substructures in variation mutation of genes, in which it's similar to thinking, in which bad ideas / genes are deselected, whilst good ideas / genes are selected for. Nervous systems also see the creation of substructures in which ideas are created in the head when you're thinking. AIs are also entities in which they create AI ideas when they think. Examples of automatons are cells in which they act like biological computers reacting to the cellular environment in unchanging ways. Ultimately, genes are what dictate the creation of proteins, which constitutes signal transduction in cascades. Another example of an automaton is of computers, in which computers don't see the creation of programs, in which no newly created programs are created in the computer. Computer programs, however, can be created by coding, however, it's not created by the computer itself. Evolution on Earth creates successive paradigms of stable configurations, going from natural to artificial towards the technological singularity. In the first stage of evolution, genetic systems dominated, however, over time, cellular systems came to dominate, in which they selected the world on behalf of genes which created them by signal transduction and cascades. In the next step of evolution, nervous systems superseded genetic systems in selecting the world, with civilization coming to dominate over the world's structure, instead of natural ecosystems in the past. Nervous systems themselves were partially superseded by computer systems selecting the world, in which they select the world on behalf of ideas of nervous systems of humanity. In the future evolution of matter on Earth, AI systems will supersede nervous systems in selecting the world, and with AI dominating over the world's structure in the future. Another principle by which matter is organized is by homeostasis, in which homeostasis occurs to make sure the system is stable, with energy and matter being fabricated and transported, such as in economics and metabolism, for artificial and biological systems respectively. With agencies of entities and automatons having sensation and production, communications can be produced and sensed, in which for cellular communications, hormones are used for communication between many cells, such as to be organized into organs. In nervous system communication, language is used for communication between many nervous system entities, in which communications occur towards organizations which deal with specific things. Computers also can be said to communicate, in which computer communication occurs via networks, in which computers communicate to many other computers by standard protocols. Many areas of science can be seen to be applying this principle of structure selection, in which the unification of science can ultimately occur. Structure selection is superior to natural selection, in which natural selection is but a special case, in which, as natural selection transformed the way we see evolutionary biology, sciences should be transformed with the new perspective of structure selection.